Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. Looking at the hadith approach of Al-Albani, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive him and have mercy on him and grant him Jannah. Famously or infamously, I guess, that he went to the books of hadith and he classified, like Imam al-Tirmidhi's Sunan, the hadith that he felt were sahih and the ones that were da'if and so on. He did that with many books. And we know that Al-Albani, he focused on maybe one, a takhrij of the maybe 8 or so types of hadith studies. And even in this one that he, so-called focused on, being self-read with no ijazat really, he didn't care for ijazat, he would just read on his own, right? And there are versions of books that he read that had mistakes. That's the problem with being self-learned. And many people in the West, they have taken this way, where they feel they can just learn, by themselves, especially with the resources now online. But that can never take the place of a sheikh, of a teacher, of a true teacher. But Al-Albani, he made many mistakes. And there are books written about his mistakes. To put into perspective, though, when you come over 1400 years after the Prophet ﷺ, so you have to, especially in hadith science, you have to rely on what came before, right? In every science, but especially in hadith science. So the first 200 years, you have the great, masters, Imam Ahmad, Imam al-Bukhari, Ibn Abi Hatim, Ali al-Madini, Ishaq ibn Rahaway, the masters, Shu'bah bin Hajjaj, these masters of hadith and critics. So, for example, if they were evaluating a hadith, and alhamdulillah, there are times where you get reasons why they'll say there's a illah in this hadith, this hidden defect in this hadith. But sometimes you won't even know. Like they would, say there's a illah and you won't get the justification, right? In this hadith science, there's also a taste to it. And when you're so far removed, you're talking about over 1,000 years. How can you get that true taste of hadith science, right? So you have to, quote unquote, blind follow what the early imams said. Right? You're just so far removed. You're not even during Ibn Hajar, Shaykh Islam Ibn Hajar's time, passed away 852. It's at least, relatively closer, but we're so far removed. So Al-Albani, for example, he would go to a hadith and say, okay, I don't see a illah here, right? So this hadith is sahih. But Imam Ahmad and others, for example, if they say there's a illah and they didn't justify it for us, we have to go with that. It just doesn't make, especially when there's 3 or 4 people between them and the Prophet ﷺ. But for us, there's 20 or so people between us and the Prophet ﷺ. So we have to go all the way back. So we have to rely on on the masters. That's the only way to do it, when especially being over 400 years after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. So, but that's kind of one thing to consider. So he would look at a hadith and say, this hadith is sahih. I don't see a illah here. The scholars that said there was illah, they didn't justify it, right? But it doesn't make sense. So again, focusing on this one part of the hadith science is the 1 out of 8 or so, and then making so many mistakes, right? And even the same type of chain he would say sahih here, he would say it's da'if elsewhere. Right, so he was inconsistent, right? And are we going to take his grading over Imam at-Tirmidhi? Or I think he even did something with the two Sahih, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim, and the Muwatta and Sunan Abi Dawud and all this. And he has his own silsila, what is silsila sahiha, for us, for the Sunni way, the followers of the three schools of Aqidah, four schools of fiqh, and the way of Tasawwuf, we don't consider Albani in anything. Right? So him being quoted and not being quoted is the same. Like, we don't, like, it adds no value. In fact, if he says something, you probably want to look into it and is, already kind of be inclined to the opposite. Again, no ijazat, self-learn. He would read books, right? And some scholars highlighted that he would read from a version and quote from a version that had errors, right? And the scholars would highlight that. So he's relying on books that have errors, right? They need the tahqiq, and alhamdulillah, so there's always versions coming out of books. So you need to get books that have been serviced, that don't have errors. And you still might have errors anyway. But if you just go to the library and you're relying on books by themselves with no teachers, no ijazat, of course you're gonna. And people call him, mujaddid and allam and all this. Total exaggeration, right? That's definitely not permissible to do. He was not a scholar, right? He was not a scholar. And many of our scholars, they don't consider him to even be a student of knowledge, right? And he came with the bid'ah where he made the da'if hadith kal mawdu', like a fabricated, right? Pretty much dividing a hadith into sahih and fabricated, right? But with da'if hadith, we can do, there are things to do with da'if hadith. We don't just throw them out. Assuming that it doesn't even go up to Hasan, for example. We use it in Sirah, we use it in Fadail al-A'mal, and the scholars of fiqh would use da'if hadith. So he came with a lot of bid'ah, and he went against ijma' many times. And I think everyone can agree, even the Salafiyah, Wahabiyah, they can agree that we're not, well, actually, they probably won't agree, I don't know, because they consider him part of the so-called ijma' with Ibn Baz, I mean what they mean. But definitely in Aqidah and fiqh and usul and Arabic and everything else, that definitely shouldn't be, something of discussion. But hadith would probably be one of the main things that they would probably hold on to. But for us, we don't take him in anything, right? We don't consider anything that he says in any science, not hadith or fiqh or aqidah or anything, right? So that's a big difference when people will consider him some type of allama, like this great scholar, And again, rahimahullah, nothing really personal, in that we want Jannah for him. It's not like we want punishment for him. But it's kind of the same thing of Ibn Baz and Ibn Uthaymeen. We don't consider them to be scholars, right? And our scholars don't really consider them to be students of knowledge. So it's a big difference, right? And again, God forbid that we follow the four imams, right? That are mujtahideen mutlaq, but we're going to follow Ibn Baz, Ibn Uthaymeen, and Albani, who weren't scholars. Right, forget mujtahid mutlaq, they weren't even scholars, and our scholars say that they weren't even students of knowledge. So it's just a huge difference, huge difference in methodology. It really becomes a totally different religion, right? Just the perspective on things is totally different. So more can be said, but yeah, kind of in short, we don't consider Albani in anything. So when you speak to people and they rely on him, it's just you're not even standing on the same common ground. It's just totally different. They're relying on people you don't rely on, right? But they have to rely on our people. Imam al-Nawawi, Imam ibn Hajar al-Suyuti, Ibn al-Salah, al-Iraqi, al-Sakhawi, and so on. All these were Asha'ira, right? So they're the Sunni scholars of hadith. They have to rely, but we don't have to rely on them in anything, in any science, right? So all the sciences that we mentioned before go through our scholars. The ijazat, the chains. They go through Sufiya, through Ash'ira, right? And that's the only way to study Islam, right? And they know it, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.